am your host, Jay Poole, and this is Potstirrer Podcast. Welcome to Potstirrer Podcast, where politics, religion, and history collide, and it's not always polite. Today, we have a very special guest. Allison K. Garcia is a licensed professional counselor and prolific Christian novelist. She is the author of the Buscando Home series and Vivir el Dream, as well as a number of short stories, and has been a valued contributor to several anthologies. Allison has been on Potstirrer Podcast previously, and I've always enjoyed our conversations. I'm sure listeners have as well. Allison is returning today to share with us about the third and final installment of the Buscando Home series, Finding Paz. Welcome back, Allison.
Thanks for having me, Jay. I'm really excited to be here.
As I mentioned, Finding Paz, Finding Peace, is the final installment of the Buscando Home series. The earlier books being Finding Amor, meaning finding love, and Finding Seguridad, or finding safety. Did you already know how you wanted to end the series when you first started it, or did that come along at another point in the process?
Good question. So when I originally wrote Finding Amor as a standalone book, it ended really differently, and I had kind of a literally like almost come to Jesus moment where I felt really not good about how I ended that book. When I wrote it in 2014, the original first draft had her staying with Carlos, and it was a whole thing, and I was like, that never quite felt settled about it, so I set it to the side for several years. And then when I brought it back, I kind of like was encouraged by my former editor to like pray about it, which I did, and then I got this idea of how to make it into a series. So originally, when I wrote like Finding Amor, I had no idea about the ending, and I'm a pantser, i.e., I write by the seat of my pants. So I usually know how it's going to end. Now, for this book, Finding Paz, I knew sort of how I wanted it to end as I was writing it, but it evolved over time. And at one point, I was sitting in a coffee shop, and I had like a very Grinchy moment where I was like, and I think I giggled evilly in the coffee shop, probably freaking out the people behind me. And I was like, Allison's had an awful thought, a delightful, awful thought. So I was like, oh, I know how it's going to end. It's going to be horrible. Not for everybody. But like, yeah, so I was just like, yeah, it evolved as I go. I was like, well, how can I make this awful but not like over the top, but also make it about peace, because that's kind of, what it is. And I went back and forth a lot about it, because there's a lot of things that are kind of loose ends that are happening in Finding Seguridad,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a big deal. There's a lot of different things happening. And so I was like, how am I going to tie all these things up? I don't want to be cliche. And also I want it to be like authentic. But, and so I went back and forth a lot.
That makes sense. That's the thing. Like when you're creating something, a lot of times, like there's things that come up in the moment, and it's like how do I want to tell the story? Where are we going with this? What direction are we going in? There's things I'm discussing, and it's like, well, how do I tie this up? And, especially as you're ending this,
right.
It's like there are those questions and things that, it kind of comes to you at the moment sometimes. And, that's kind of how writing goes a lot of times.
Yeah. And also, like, as I was writing Finding Paz, I had already thought about doing a spin-off novel with two of the characters and making it into like a queer Christian fiction thing. So, like, whenever those characters were having a scene together in Finding Paz, I only wanted to write their scenes. And I was like, I want to start the love story now, but I can't. Like, I need to finish what I started with this, because they're not the main people. And then I got to move into the main thing for the next book. But I really enjoy writing some of those scenes. It's hard to get all of the pieces together sometimes with books.
Okay, so in terms of Finding Paz, without getting into spoilers too much, tell us a little bit about our main characters and where they are at this point in the story going into Finding Paz.
For those who have read the other two books, Finding Amor and Finding Seguridad, just to chunk the story, it's about a family from El Salvador who has come kind of piecemeal to the U.S. First the grandmother came, then the mom came, and now the son came, and they're all kind of trying to come back together. The grandma's named Sandra, the mom is Ana, and the boy is Emmanuel, right? And then there's friends are Lauren and Peter. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening in the second book, at the end of the second book, is that they find that the great-grandmother of Emmanuel, Mamita, has just passed away, and Ana realizes that she thinks she might be pregnant. So that's kind of how the book ends, and she has left this not good situation with her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend now, an abusive situation with Carlos, and so she has left that, but he's been like, kind of, I think in book 2, he's kind of chasing after them a little bit, and like, you know, gets arrested, and it's a whole thing. And so they think he's safely in jail, but he's not. So we know, like, as the readers, that like Carlos is not in jail, and then she's pregnant, and then the grandmother just died. So that's kind of how book 2 ends. So book 3 picks up there, where also they're also trapped together in a snowstorm. So there's been a blizzard, and then Lauren's friend Emma ends up showing up as well, because she's dropping off a Christmas present, and then they're all trapped there for like 5 days in the middle of this blizzard. And so that's the first time really they're all under the same roof together, the grandmother and the mother and the son. And so they're starting to learn about each other more, and they're like, Anna's always been kind of distant from her mom because she left her and never came back for her. But Emmanuel and Sandra get along great, and Anna like really struggles to see like, who is this person now? There's a lot of feelings she has. Like, that's not the mom I knew. And I think that's a thing that happens a lot in families, where like, you know, the grandkid, you're like, wait a second, like, I didn't get to do that when I was, you know,
right.
Like on a bigger level, like, you know, she didn't get that love because Sandra wasn't in a good space for that. You know, she had PTSD, then she got into drugs and stuff, and just had a really rough go of it for a long time. And so, this book, I'm excited, like, Sandra has her own point of view. So it's like 4 point of views. So it's like Ana, Sandra, Emmanuel, and Carlos. So you see what's happening with Carlos, where he's made some really not great choices and is suffering the consequences of those. And also kind of Emmanuel is dealing with some kind of big questions for a little guy, you know, 8-year-old. He's like, if, you know, he just has learned about God, and he's thinking like, why do some people have to struggle and some people don't? You know, why, like, what is faith almost? Like, what does it mean? The different things, you know, things that like really hard questions for 8-year-olds to deal with. But I mean, yeah, like, and so he's dealing with some of that stuff, and Sandra's trying to get in with the family, you know. She's been slowly, like, they're like, Emmanuel's been reeling her in, little by little, with his little cuteness. So yeah, I think it kind of starts out like that, and there's a lot going on. And Lauren and Peter are having their own journey of like figuring out, like, they've just kind of come to like the fact that, like, learning about white privilege, systemic racism, and that's a whole thing that Lauren's been kind of on a journey about as well, becoming more kind of progressive in her understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Like, I noticed a lot there going on, and I think to your point about Sandra and Ana and Emmanuel, and just kind of the whole thing of like the family dynamic, and I think particularly when it comes to Sandra and Ana, it's like, okay, you might have a certain relationship with your parents when you're younger, and then when you're an adult, you realize like, okay, well, there's things that maybe they may have been dealing with when they were raising you, or like you kind of look at them as adults. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's something I know that at least I can relate to on some level. I mean, obviously I haven't dealt with the issues that they dealt with that led them to that point. But I think that a lot of people can relate to the idea of going from your parents being how they are, like when you're being raised, or like when you're a kid, and whatever that dynamic might be, and, if it might be, a little bit more difficult. But then as an adult, maybe like not necessarily excusing things or whatever, but just coming to a better understanding of them as an adult and be able to look back differently.
Yeah, because I think like we all start out thinking that our parents are kind of perfect, even if what they're doing is not perfect, until we know better. So people that are in abusive situations, I think a lot of times they feel really bad, but they don't know that that's not what's normal, which is what I've learned from like doing a lot of counseling with people. And I think once you realize that what you're in is not the norm, and that, you have this, then it's like these people are not, these are flawed humans. And then there's the teenage stage where everything's a flaw, probably,
Oh, yeah.
even in families that are not like, there's not like domestic violence or different situations. But, there's that point for many years where you think they don't know anything. And then there's the growing up stage where you realize they were just humans, just like you are. And also, like you said, doesn't excuse everything, because sometimes people are pretty, can be pretty horrible. And sometimes you can see like, okay, I see how that happened. I don't like that happened, but I see what their life led to, how they went that way. It's like a better understanding, like a more round understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. This kind of ties into another question I have. So there are a lot of important themes that really stuck out to me in finding Paz. And it seems, at least in my head, these themes have a commonality. So the themes that in my mind stuck out to me included grief, unresolved trauma, regret, bitterness, and anger. And so these are emotions and issues that are unfortunately a part of life, but unless they're properly addressed, these can keep us away from gaining a sense of peace.
Yeah.
You were writing a story and these themes were included. Was this intentional? And what inspired you to highlight these issues?
I would say there was probably some intentionality and some non-intentionality, just because I'm a pantser. So I would say, like, I knew kind of going into the story that Mamita would be passing away at some point, just because she was very old, and when Emmanuel left, she pretty much said, this will probably be the last time we'll see each other. And that felt accurate. I mean, she not had an easy life herself. I don't know really how old she would probably be, only like 65 or something, considering the ages of the other characters. But that's a lot considering she went through a whole civil war and and all the things.
Yeah.
So and we don't even know her whole story. There's another thing that could be a cool story. But so I knew that, and I knew that would be a very complicated grief, especially for Sandra, because she left. She hadn't seen Mamita, her mother, since she left El Salvador in I want to say the 90s, and so it was like you hear in the next book, she talks about kind of the fact that the book that I'm editing right now, she does get into that a little bit because she's in that book.
Okay.
And so she talks about that some, but it's complicated. And then for Anna, she hasn't seen her for a lot of years. For both Anna and Emmanuel, that was their mom pretty much. That was how they were raised. They were raised by Mamita. That's the only mother they knew. And so all three of them had the same mother. My favorite part of the whole book, I think, one of my favorite parts of the book, is where so Lauren and Emma are chatting in the pantry, and they step out and they see Anna, Emmanuel, and Sandra all at the counter or something, and they're making tortillas, and they look at them and they're all making tortillas the exact same way. And they stop and Emma goes, whoa, and they look at each other and they realize that Mamita was the one that taught them to make tortillas, all of them, the same mom,
Yeah.
And so they had the same exact person teaching them these things, but 20 years in between, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing, that she has this thread that's woven out through everything, and her love, I think, is what made them be able to get back together, to find this peace. And I think that's part of the grieving process, is they realize she's not gone, she's in them. And Gosh, I guess I really like that part. Sorry.
Yeah.
But it's just like, and I think that grief is part of life. I did a really awesome grief training that I went to that was beautiful. It was super specific. It was love and grief in the BIPOC community during COVID. And it was also just so powerful for like each person there. I think we just took, and one of the things they said is you can't have anything without also having grief because in everything in life there is also loss.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things, like, as we're going about the world, there's grief, and you're going to feel it even when you don't want to. Sometimes it's going to hit you like a wave in the ocean. It'll take you like a riptide. We talked about it in that way. And also we still have to live. We're still living.
Yep.
And so it's figuring out, how do you find peace when your whole world is chaos, And I think that that's a question a lot of us have been asking for the last 2 years at least, if not for our whole lives. How do you find peace in the midst of chaos? And I think that things don't have to be peaceful for us to be able to find peace within things that are going on in life, because life doesn't stop. It just keeps going.
True. That's so true. That's something that I can definitely resonate with. Yeah, one of the reasons why I tend to be interested in things like genealogy is because I like the idea of kind of learning about those past threads.
Mm-hmm.
I've lost a lot of people in my life, and that's sort of been a constant throughout my life. And doing some of those kinds of activities, being a Black American, I can generally only go back so far, in terms of ancestry. But what is really cool that you can do is sort of go out instead of upwards, going out like kind of almost like laterally. And so it's like, okay, I'm learning more about relatives and stuff and just the things that connect us together. And even those that are living, but you just didn't know certain stories about them, or people that you have known that maybe have passed on in more recent years, you learn more about them. There's those connections that tie you to them. And then in a way, they're not, like, even though they may be gone, they're not gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that means a lot.
It does mean a lot. Yeah. I think, like, one of the things I did with my grandmother, like, she was like a really cool lady. Really, I feel like I get my strong, like the strong women in the family. Like, when I think about her, I think the Buxton side of my family. And one of the things that I did was, she loved genealogy stuff too. And so she had gone back and looked at stuff. And also, she was a great storyteller. So for a project for psychology, I was doing genealogy stuff. And then I did another project. And then just for fun, we ended up just like recording like cassette tapes of her just telling stories of the family, like hours and hours of them that I have, like, and now she's passed for, I think, 10 years. But I have these cassette tapes, like, full of family stories that she told, just things that I think, like, would have gotten lost with her. And it's just, it's really cool to be able to talk to people and hear these stories, because so easily they get lost. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I hear you. And I think going back to finding past, in the midst of like grief and difficult situations and things, it's really neat to be able to find those connections, find those ways to connect, and you still miss those people that are important to you. It's cool that you highlight the scene with the tortillas, because it's sort of like, okay, in that seemingly small way, it shows that, okay, there is that connection.
And for them for Sandra that left in the 90s, she left when Anna was a baby, was like a toddler, and then Anna left when Manuel was a baby. Like, they really haven't spent a lot of like time together. So that's like really like the only time they're all there together. And yet they have a commonality. They have this mamita, like, was one of that was one of their threads that ties them together. And as they get to know each other, like, learning that there's going to be things they have in common, things they don't, but they are tied together more than they thought. And I think, the Buscando Home, which means looking for home, they are slowly finding home together again as a family.
Okay. That's such an awesome thing. So besides that, is there anything else that you feel like readers can take away from Finding Past, as well as the entire Buscando Home series as a whole?
I mean, I feel like always when I books, I have kind of a couple goals in mind. I want to either open somebody's eyes to situations that are happening, and I want people to feel seen, to see themselves in the book. So I always ask people to try to read with like an open heart and open mind, to try to put yourself in the shoes of the characters in the book and see commonalities within your own life. And just kind of with the overarching goal to be more loving to yourself and to others. It's just my general vibe.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important lesson to take from it. I'm enjoying your novels a great deal because they illustrate perspectives that, as someone who lives in the Midwest, living in Cincinnati, I don't always have exposure to. For you, as a white novelist who has incorporated perspectives from actual Latino people and has created a fictional account that feels real, you've been sort of a bridge builder. But in the very beginning of Finding Past, you make a statement, and this is what it says, quote, "I wanted to let you all know that after this book, I will be stepping away from writing Latino Christian fiction and will head down the road of writing queer Christian fiction," end quote. So I'm going to ask a little bit about that, and I want to talk about both parts of the statement as well as just the whole statement.
Yeah.
So for the first part, you elaborated saying, quote, "As a white person who is merely Latina at heart, I have slowly realized that this is time for me to leave the storytelling to those who have lived experiences in that realm," end quote. So when I read this, it kind of actually reminded me of a previous conversation that we had. And I think it might have been when we were talking about finding Amor. And I asked this question. I remember asking a question that related to avoiding issues of appropriation and being able to capture perspectives, being a Caucasian author, writing about Latin American experiences. So that was back in about 2018. But then you've had the shift since then. And so my question is, what led to your shift in perspective and decision to, as you say, leave the storytelling to those who have had those lived experiences?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and I'm glad that you were like, hey, you answered this differently before, because that's cool. Because I think there's a lot of growth I've had in the last 3-4 years. I think for me, partially right now, because I left my former marriage and I'm not in that church community, I feel a little bit more disconnected from the Latinx community than I used to. And while I still feel like a lot of that is my heart, I don't think I have my finger on the pulse like I used to, is one thing. Also, just, I think that, I'm very good at reading people and understanding people, and at the same time, there's one thing about reading and understanding, and one different thing about being, I think, in a way that I can never quite understand. And while I'm going to have one of the main characters of my next book is Latina, but just because that's the character that I want in the book. I don't see it exactly as Latino Christian fiction, because it isn't as entrenched in the Latinx culture as much as some of my other books. And so while there's going to be lots of Latino flair mixed in with the queer flair and all these other things, I think it's not as entrenched in it as the other stuff, just because I do feel like there are things that I just maybe can't get from not being raised by Latinx people, but like not being Latinx myself. Mm-hmm. And I just want to step aside for like own voices, and I feel also just really called to write queer Christian fiction. Like as a queer Christian myself, I'm feeling very much a scarcity of resources in that region, and I just feel like that's where God's calling me to write. And when you get, just kind of part of the thing with, I guess it works with my pantser kind of mentality, is I just go with the flow, and that's where like the flow, which I see as God, is taking me. And really hard finding paths sometimes, because I just wanted to go with the flow and start that story already. But I couldn't, because I was like, no, not the time yet. I gotta finish this book and then I write the whole book. And the other one, leave it, Allison, leave it. So I needed to close that chapter properly before I opened the next one fully.
I get it. Like, at least in terms of you've been working on something, you need to like kind of wrap it up. But then it's like you're looking further ahead to where the flow is taking you, where you feel like, okay, you feel led to go,
I feel so drawn to, yeah, it was very hard to finish it. I don't like editing anyway, so I'm just going to preface it with that. Like right now I'm editing, and I'm editing my queer Christian fiction, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get this, it's going to be done, I'm going to publish this in 2021, and I was like, nope, ain't happening. Like, I was like, oh, good try, good college try. But like, I really tried. But I really don't like editing. It's not that bad once I do it. But in my head, it's really bad.
Yeah.
Possible ADHD there. But like, so I felt really called to do that. Like when I was editing, I was like, this isn't my heart anymore. This is, I want to start this new story. But then when I was editing, I was like, you know what, this is my, I'm not going to get choked up over nothing. Like, this is like, these are people. I didn't want to stop the story,
Yeah.
Because these people are in my head and my heart now. It's like part of these are like my people that I've created. They're like part of my family or something.
Yeah, it's like you get attached to this world and like these people that you created, and
they feel real.
Yeah.
I can see them in my head. Which is, exciting. On a side note, I don't know if you know about this, but like speaking of seeing things outside of your head, did you see some of my like Instagram posts that a Hollywood producer is wants to make Viviera dream into on the screen?
I did not see that.
Like, that's a thing. That's a legit thing that's happening right now.
Oh, wow.
I have a shopping agreement, and it's a whole thing that they have a year to shop it around, and like it's awesome. And anyway, it's crazy. I don't know how that's my life, but it's a thing. I don't know if it's amazing. Out, I'm really excited because this guy's really cool. So
yeah, that's absolutely amazing. That's really awesome. So yeah. So before we kind of get into the second part of your statement, are there any specific Latina or Latino authors that you might recommend to listeners?
Yeah, I like Reina Grande. I like her book. I'm also like a little bit old school. Well, I'm just going to like look at my thing I have here. I want to read like Felix Ever After. I don't think that's a thing. Everyone, there's so many books. Solita was a good one. I like Reina Grande. I'm also like Sandra Cisneros just like dropped a book. I think that's the House on Mango Street lady. So that's like older. And I would say like there's Victor somebody. He wrote Macho, which is supposed to be a good book. There's also I like Esmeralda Santiago. These are some older authors though. Like the one that wrote like Water for Chocolate. That's a really good book. That's old though, but like I like the classics. And then Isabel Allende dropped another book recently, and I was like, what? And she has like a whole YouTube channel thing, and she's so cute.
Oh, okay. That's cool. I have to check that out. I've been really into YouTube lately, so that's. Yeah,
I think I've seen her like on Facebook Live and stuff, and she's like definitely she's older but she's a legend, so that's pretty awesome.
That's cool.
There's probably like so many people. See, this is where I would probably do a disservice. Maybe somebody that's like, I'm sure there's like 1,000 own voices out there. I have like my own friends that I like their stuff. I like Cynthia Marcano. That's she writes some really good stuff.
Okay.
But I don't know like a whole lot of names. I haven't been reading too much.
Like
I haven't. I've been watching a lot of Netflix though. But yeah, I haven't read too many books. I bought a lot of books, but I have not read them.
Yeah. I got a lot of books for Christmas, and I asked for a lot of books, so I got a lot of books for Christmas, but I'm like so behind.
Yeah, I really need to read books. I picked up one the other day at Barnes and Noble because I had like a gift card, and it's like it's called One Last Stop. Okay. And I started reading it, and I'm really enjoying it.
Cool. Okay, yeah. For Christmas, I got the 1619 Project, and yeah, and I've taken some things from like what I've read about it here and there, but I wanted the whole published thing, and so I have it, and it's huge, and so it's just like, yeah,
yeah. I bought I bought a really cool book at some bookstore somewhere, and it was all about. And I wish I knew the name, because when you started talking about your family and like stretching out, like looking linearly, it reminded me of this book, but I can't remember the name of it. But it's all about some kind of box that, like, I think an enslaved woman had that she passed on throughout all the generations of her family, and they were able to keep keepsakes in it. And it was like, the book looked really good, and I can't remember the name, and I'm sorry. I can get it for you at the end, but it looked really good, and I want to read it. But also, I'm like, that probably is going to make me cry a lot.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be really emotional, but also it looks really interesting and just like something I'd like to read.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I enjoy reading. It's just so I have such a long list of books, and it's just like getting through everything. It's just, and then it's like, you get through one and it's like, oh yeah, I've heard about this one. And so, yeah.
I have started the book Untamed 3 separate times. And it's so easy to read it. I could finish it in like a day if I just like sat down and stopped playing Animal Crossing or something. And then, but so I just get distracted. And so I'm like, oh, I have to restart this book because I forgot where I stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, I know how that is. Like my thing is The Sims.
Oh, I love The Sims.
Yeah. So as for the second part of your initial statement, you elaborate regarding your choice to write queer Christian fiction. And you say, quote, I'm very excited for this journey as it fits with who I am as a queer Christian, end quote. In our most recent conversation on the podcast, you shared that you're now living in your truth as a lesbian. And I love that you've been able to embrace being both queer and Christian. Unfortunately, so often Christians who are LGBTQ plus are made to feel like they have to choose between living as who they are and their faith.
Yeah.
So you're shifting from writing fictionalized stories based on the experiences of a community that you have an affinity towards, but you're not a part of, to writing fictionalized stories based on experiences of a community you are a part of.
Yeah.
As a creative, is there an adjustment that comes with that?
There is. I think my editor noticed it. She was like, these sentences are really long. And part of it is I was just writing from my heart. It was just coming out because part of it is, this is part of my story, And so it was a little bit like stream of consciousness was happening, I think. And it could be really powerful to write some stories and really painful to write some things. So yeah, it's been interesting. For the story that called The Dry Depths of My Soul, which is the spin-off, there's 2 characters. One who is a lesbian and has been out around her community, like apart from everybody else for a while, but the people in her life now don't actually know that she's gay. And then there's another character who is realizing, as she's about to turn 40, that she might be gay. And so there's like an emerging person and a person that's kind of been hidden a little bit from their family, which I think are pretty average tales for people in their 40s. You know, some people are living out and about, but there's a lot that aren't. And so as I'm writing this, I'm especially the one that came out later in life, and is really like kind of figuring herself out. She's at first like, you know, what I was taught was that originally when I was little was being gay was a sin, and that homosexuality is a sin, just like, you know, the Sodom and Gomorrah stuff, and a man lies with a man like a woman, etc.
All those clobber verses,
clobber passages, exactly, which is literally what I was editing last night, talking about clobber passages. You get a gold star for knowing clobber passages. So she's like realizing like, well, what does this mean for me? Like, this is kind of like what I went through, was like, like I wasn't able to look at it. Like, and she has a kind of a different story than I do, but like similarly, I know for myself, I was like, what does this mean for me? If this is really who I am, if this is my, if I am really gay, does that mean I can't believe what I believed before? Does that mean that I am just going to go to hell? Like, then I don't want to do that, but then what does it mean if I don't do that? Like, and so it was a whole back and forth. And I'm really glad to have a really good community base of like other queer Christians, because also sometimes what happens is people throw out the baby with the bathwater. You realize you're gay and you're like, well, I guess I can't be in God's family anymore, and that's it. And they're mad because sometimes people have really crappy experiences, and me included. And sometimes people are awful. There's religious trauma all throughout the LGBTQ community. It's a legit thing. And so being able to not throw out the baby with the bathwater and do deconstruction and reconstruction and work on my faith and understand, like, getting down to the nitty-gritty and understanding what things really mean, realizing that I'm still a child of God, that I'm still loved and deserving of love, was really powerful and important to me, and that's something that I want to have come across in my books. And I also understand that there's going to be a lot of people that are angry on both sides. A lot of people on the Christian side are not going to like this stuff. I've already got some of that. And there's going to be a lot of people on the queer side of things that are not happy because they've had a lot of religious trauma, and I get that. And not everybody's story is going to be the same. And I understand that too. And also I want to be able to say, hey, there's a way to do both if you want to do both.
Okay.
And just kind of like have nice stories and interesting stories, and for people to be seen as like within the community. And I think there are more queer Christian authors like emerging. I have I was just in an anthology. Oh, it's called, I think it's Reconstructing Christmas, and it's a holiday anthology. S.J. Blasco is the author, and they've written a lot of cool books. And I have several other queer Christian friends who have books coming out in that realm, and I'm just excited to see this genre slowly kind of popping up.
I think it's such a good thing, because I'm just thinking of when I became an evangelical. This was like in late 90s, early 2000s. So over 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And this was still back when, I mean, not to say that it's easy for people who are LGBTQ plus now, but back then, I think it was even more difficult.
Oh, yeah.
And just thinking about how those kinds of resources and people writing about being both gay and Christian, I don't remember seeing that very often. Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, I
didn't even know it was a thing until like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, you can be gay and a Christian? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I knew people that were gay and spiritual, but not really considered themselves a Christian.
Yeah. Like, now, I remember when I was in college and I worked with a guy who was gay, and I knew he was gay, but I didn't know he was also a Christian. And it was like when he told me that, in my own ignorance, I couldn't really wrap my head around that. Mm-hmm. Like, how could you be both?
Yeah.
And, over time, as I've grown in terms of my understanding and my acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community and some of the experiences that I've had, I'm not part of that community, but there are people that are very close to me that have come out over the past several years. And that actually was for me a turning point in terms of leaving evangelicalism. I'm still a Christian, but I don't identify with evangelical Christianity. And that tipping point for me was issues of not accepting people who were queer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've been really fortunate to find a church community in my town, where it's completely queer affirming, like very much, and a lovely group of people, and just where I have just felt completely accepted and loved without any question. And it's just been really nice. It's so refreshing to just land somewhere and then people to just be genuinely happy to see you and not have to put on filters. And it's just super nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine, like, being able to kind of live and grow in your own truth and being able to be both and have that affirmed. I mean, I would imagine that's an amazing experience. And unfortunately, not everyone has that experience. But hopefully through these writings, and I mean, one of the books that I thought was really helpful to start understanding that, okay, you could be both, and is God and the Gay Christian.
Yeah.
By Matthew Vines. Yeah. Yes.
I quote it in the book.
Yeah. I leaned upon that one. I did a couple of episodes, like maybe a couple of years ago, about being Christian and affirming. And that was one of the resources I leaned on heavily. I think it's awesome to then also see this. And this is one of the things that you're a part of at this point that you're getting into, is this community of people who are writing novels about the queer Christian experience. And I think that that's something that will only help people who are in that position, who they're realizing that, okay, you know what, I might be gay, I might be queer, but then at the same time, not wanting to walk away from their faith.
Right.
Because, they hold that in high regard as well. Finding that, okay, you don't have to do that.
And there's a lot of healing that can happen there too. Because I think there's a lot of stuff, I don't want to get into all of this, but like that evangelical Christianity is getting wrong. Like, so many things, right? And so, like, we don't have time for all that. But like,
I have like episodes. I have like episodes and episodes and episodes devoted to that. Like,
I was like, refer back to all of Jaye's former podcast. Yeah. So, like, I think there's so many things that are wrong, that we've gotten wrong, and I think as the church, and I'm just glad to be trying to put out things to just be more affirming, to be loving in like more authentic ways, and to kind of, I'm just excited about it. And I read a lot of books. I read God and the Gay Christian. The first one I read was almost like a theology textbook. It was called What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality. If you want like a theological deep study, that's the one. There's Torn is a really good one by Justin Lee. Untamed by Glennon Doyle is really awesome. Just like girl power, but also like really interesting book. Undivided, I forgot the authors for that. And then Unclobbered by Colby Martin. Those are all like kind of nonfiction. Some of them are autobiographical, like Untamed by Glennon Doyle is autobiographical about her and her wife, Abby. They're some really good books if people want to further their understanding about that and kind of understand about the Clobber passages and what the Bible really does say before we went through and misinterpreted many things.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is awesome that the genre is growing, and I think that it, has such potential to touch a lot of people who are hurting and who have had religious, spiritual trauma within the church because of how they've been treated because of their sexual orientation.
Yeah, or gender identity, depending on the person. Yeah, or both.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also, have you seen the Netflix movie Pray Away? I
have not.
It's really good and horrible at the same time. But it was, that one is all about kind of the ex-gay movement.
Okay.
Where it was like about conversion therapy, and how they did all these ex-gay camps, and it was a whole movement that you could be healed of your gayness. And it was a documentary, so it was like the real people that were living this whole thing.
Wow.
And it was, it's intense and very good. But I guess the gist of it is that everybody thought everybody else was doing it better, and they thought, well, I'm just going to keep pretending I'm getting these feelings getting rid of because I know this guy's doing it, but that guy wasn't doing it either. He was just thinking you were doing it better than he was. And yeah, it was really powerful. And to see that it's coming up again, like, and in the trans community too, like, it was really sad to see there's a surge again, which is very disappointing.
Yeah.
So, but interesting. It was very interesting, I think, for people that want to understand some of the religious trauma and why a lot of people have that in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. In my city, they've actually banned conversion therapy.
Yeah, in our state, they have too.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, hopefully that happens in a more widespread way because it is really damaging to people.
I had seen, before I unfriended people from my former church, I had seen somebody post about how bad it was that conversion therapy was going away. And all these people were talking about how great conversion therapy was. And I was like, I'm going to need to defriend a lot of people on the Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you hate that? Like, where you're just, you go through Facebook and like there's those issues and you just like, yeah, why am I still friends with you? I just can't. I mean, I guess there's difference of opinion, and then there's
I hate you as a person.
Yeah, there's not accepting who someone is as a person. And it's like, no.
Yeah. There's a difference between, if the difference of opinion is you think that person is worth less than you are, then that's not a difference of opinion. That's a difference of values.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a big difference there. Whether or not we like chocolate or vanilla ice cream is
totally Cleveland different. Indians, if they're going to have a good year or something,
Right.
I can still be friends with somebody that enjoys the movie Princess Bride. I can even be in love with them / my girlfriend loves Princess Bride. And I don't really love Princess Bride, but, and that's okay to have different opinions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff, that's a difference of opinion. John likes metal and I don't.
Yeah.
I like 80s pop and that's not his thing. Those are differences of opinion. We can coexist. That's fine. But it's another thing to
basically be like racism doesn't exist. Like, like of opinion. That's straight up ignorance. And
racism doesn't exist and it's all in the heads of people of color. Or in the case of like sexual orientation or gender identity, it's like, we can change them. It's just.
I went to a school board meeting and there were grown men yelling, God gave men penises and girls vaginas and that's just how it is.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then a doctor came up and was like, actually, there's all this intersex stuff. And then he was like, that doctor said something otherwise. And I like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But there's all these, and they were like, we love Jesus and that's why trans people shouldn't get bathrooms.
Yeah, it's just, oh my gosh. It's just, it's really so frustrating to see just the ignorance. And I think it's not even just, it's like the very willful ignorance, even when faced with facts and information to the contrary. It's like, well, no, like, I'm just going to still live in this,
Yeah.
I can't.
And then they were just being awful. It was really scary. It was like a counter protest.
Okay.
So I went to this counter protest, and they yelled the national anthem. They saluted the flag, the Pledge of Allegiance, and they yelled it like it was like, this is America. But it was loud, and it was, and they called people names, and it was a whole thing, and it was just very disheartening.
Yeah. I think, without going too far into the weeds, I think that a lot of it is that you have a segment of our population that feels threatened by change and by diversity. And when I say diversity, I mean racial diversity, ethnic diversity, diversity in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, how people identify and people being able to affirm who they are. For a segment of the population, they feel threatened by that change. They feel like they're losing grip.
Well, they've been told, like, hey, these people are trying to take your crumb. And the people at the top that have the whole pie are like, listen up. You see that crumb? Y'all are fighting over that crumb. They're going to take your crumb. Don't pay attention over to here that we've got this whole pie. But this person's going to take your crumb, so you better fight to the death to keep that crumb and stop looking over here that we've got this whole pie.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Sort of winding down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is sort of a broad question.
Okay.
So you're, as we've talked about earlier, you're ending the Buscando Home series.
Yeah.
And with that, you're ending your season of writing Latino Christian fiction. Even though you have mentioned that you're going to have a character, that is Latino in your upcoming queer Christian novel. At the same time, this is going to be it for kind of this focused Latino Christian fiction.
Yeah.
So you're moving on to a new season of your life where you're writing queer Christian fiction. And while some things are the same, specifically how you're talking about the Christian experience, it's a different type of Christian experience. That's I guess that's the best way I can put it.
Mm-hmm.
And for listeners who have listened to all of our conversations on the podcast, it seems to reflect how you've grown as a person. And that's something we've kind of talked about already, is how there's been a level of growth. And it's something that, honestly, I can appreciate it. I love growth, seeing things differently, learning and growing and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So just in general, how does it feel for you making this kind of transition in your writing career?
It feels good. I feel like it's a natural flow. I even feel like as I was editing, I have the 3 books. Even as I was going through the process, there is growth in every book. And it leads me to this book that I'm going to next, The Dry Depths of My Soul. I don't think it's going to be a very sharp left turn for most people that have read my books. It's going to have a very similar vibe because it's just the natural flow of who I am and how I've been, the trajectory of like how I've been going. It's still pretty progressive and liberal, which is something that anyone that's read my books would say is kind of tracks with the books that I write, as I wrote about undocumented immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about marginalized groups. It's just a different marginalized group within the Christian community, and it feels good. Sometimes when I look back at some of the ways I've phrased things in my former books, that it feels a little ooky, as my friend would say, because I'm like, oh, I don't quite believe that anymore, or oh, I forgot that I used to think those things. And I think if somebody just read Vivid El Dream and then they just read this, it might feel really different. But it might not also. Like, maybe it just seems very different inside me. I think that it'll flow nicely into the new series. And yet I think I'll get into more of the depth of some of the things. It'll be taking on different topics that haven't been talked about in the other books. And hopefully that'll be something interesting and refreshing for people to read.
Awesome. Listeners, definitely check out Finding Pass. And where would listeners be able to purchase it?
It's on Amazon, so you can get it Kindle or paperback. So if you prefer holding a book in your hands and feeling the nice cream-colored paper and the smell and then listening to the pages turn like I do, then, grab yourself a copy of that on Amazon, the paperback. Otherwise, get your little Kindle and just swipe.
All right. Awesome. So Finding Pass is out, and then you said that you're working on an upcoming novel, The Dry Depths of My Soul?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. That is the next one. It is coming out. Also, I've been in 2 anthologies since I think we've talked, which is the March for Justice and The Heart of the Season. And so those are, 3, because Reconstructing Christmas. So I've been doing things since we last spoke. But yeah, The Dry Depth of My Soul, I'm going to say, look for it maybe in the springtime, because I just know my editing takes a while. But that's my goal. My goal is a springtime release. We shall see if I shall make it.
All right. And anything else that is next for you? Do you have any other projects, events, anything that you're excited about?
Well, I am intrigued to see if the whole movie thing or the screen debut of Vivid El Dream will happen. So, fingers crossed, they'll find some people to finance it. That would be really awesome. And yeah, I'm excited about that possibility. And I think that those are the main two projects I have. I already wrote the book 2 of the new series that I have. So, but that one's like in first draft mode, so it is light. It's
All
just
right.
original NaNoWriMo first draft, rough draft mode. So that one, that would be the book that comes after Dry Depths of My Soul. And as a true pantser, I don't remember what I called that book, so I cannot name that for you.
Okay. Well, so if we did want to keep up with everything that you're doing, like any social media or like where we can keep up with your projects.
I have a Facebook author page. It's Allison K. Garcia author. Same thing for Instagram. I'm also on Twitter, the writer. And I have an Amazon author page that if you wanted to see the anthologies that I'm in, I should be tagged in all of those. And I think I'm Goodreads account too. I think that probably the Amazon author page is probably the most up to date of all my works.
Okay, cool. And I'll make sure that I link to those in the show notes.
Cool. That sounds lovely.
All right. Well, as always, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on Potstirrer Podcast. Thank you again, Allison, for joining me.
It was really fun. Thank you so much, Jaye.
Thank you very much for listening to Potstirrer Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Prime, or on your favorite podcast app. Go to potstirrerpodcast.com/download and you'll see the links. If you subscribe, which is completely free, you'll be able to access new episodes as soon as they're released. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give it 5 stars and leave a review. And I enjoy tweeting, so follow me on Twitter at PotstirrerCast. I'm Jaye Poole. Let's fight for America's future because freedom is not free.